Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Sheila Patel. I'm the Chief Medical Officer at Chopra, and I'm really excited to have this conversation with Dr. Manu Jaggi, who's a pharmaceutical scientist, a researcher, also creating herbal products using ancient Ayurvedic wisdom, and is also researching wellness and well-being and what that means. So we're going to have a conversation. So thank you for joining me and talk about healing and what healing is. And my experience in Ayurveda is that, we do have this innate healing ability. And actually, we know this in medicine as well, that we have these mechanisms that are trying to always keep us in this physiological balance of homeostasis. But I think the Ayurvedic perspective goes beyond that we can actually create health on a daily basis. And from my perspective, and then you can share your perspective on what self-healing means, that is the natural process that we have, but two things happen. Either, I like to keep things simple, so I say two things happen. Either things are getting in the way of that healing process, our natural healing ability. So this could be toxins, say physical toxins, or some sort of something that's interfering with the mechanisms that we have to self-heal. It could be emotional toxins too. We talk a lot about our thoughts and emotions and how that impacts our physiology. So things are getting in the way of that self-healing. Or number two, maybe we're not nourishing ourselves and giving ourselves the things that our body needs, like the building blocks to self-heal, whether it's food or plant, medicines or lifestyle practices, or even thoughts and, positive input, through the mental space. So usually when I'm working with people, I try to either figure out what's getting in the way, help them bring in things that nourish and mind and body, and then the self-healing process just happens. So maybe you can share your thoughts on self-healing and what that means to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Sheila. It's such a pleasure to meet with you again, and I'm so glad we are having this conversation. Self-healing is such a fascinating subject. And I've been looking at self-healing from a slightly different perspective. Since I'm a scientist, I'm looking at it a little differently. I'm trying to understand the science behind this. But yes, you very rightly said, healing is very is are different things. So one, there is a physical healing, or the healing at the level of the body, which is measurable, and you can measure it, and you can do things about it. But there is another very important healing that we very often do not pay much attention to, which is the healing at the level of the mind, or at the spiritual level. I won't even get into that, because I'm sitting in front of an expert, so you know better than most of us as to how spiritual healing works. But to me, that's even more challenging, because when you're going through a stress, you are unable to measure. Somebody has diabetes, somebody has hypertension. There is a measurable endpoint. So one recognizes that, and one tries to heal oneself. On the other hand, each one of us goes through stress at some point in life, and that, in my view, does more damage at a physical level. But we are unable to measure it, the way we measure any other insult to the body. And very often we do not even like to recognize that trauma. So that's a more complex subject, but let's devote some time to the physical healing. Dr. Sheila, you mentioned about our innate ability to heal ourselves. So if you look at the evolutionary process, the lower living beings, they had this ability to heal themselves, to regenerate. We know reptiles are able to regenerate. So if you cut off a tail of a lizard, it grows back. Now, it's not like, in humans, you do not regenerate. We are regenerating all the time. We are, our cells are dying all the time. We are regenerating our cells. Um, if we break our bone, even if you don't do anything, you don't put it in a cast, your bone will regenerate and heal. Or sometimes, if we get a cut on our body and we don't do anything, it will still heal. The
Mhm.
skin cells will grow back, and there'll be elasticity, and there'll be collagen formed. So that's also a process of healing.
Mhm.
Now, since that is already innate to our body, is it something that we can train to do ourselves? Can we do certain things, where if there is a trauma, if there is an insult to the body, if there is some kind of injury which results into inflammation, which results into loss of immunity, if it results into the disturbance of the microbiome in our gut, are there ways to be able to heal ourselves? I think the one of the first things is to be able to recognize the fact that we are there is a problem in our body.
Mhm.
And I recall, last time we had this conversation, we talked about, a lot of tests telling us that there is inflammation in the body or there is something wrong. But very many times we do not even know if something is going wrong. And
Mhm.
that's where the whole thing of this biomarkers. I remember we had this conversation, but let me just, very quickly talk a little bit about that. Uh, it's amazing um, how inflamed our bodies are in today's time.
Mhm.
Something that a normal test doesn't even pick up. The pollution, the stress, the food we eat, um, so many things are leading to us becoming very inflamed inside.
Mhm.
And that to me is not a good situation to be in. So we've got to be able to identify that and then be able to heal that.
Mhm.
And Ayurveda teaches us so many different ways to be able to address that situation. So, we've been talking about in the past, what does meditation do? What does the music therapy do? What does yoga do? Um, what does energy healing do? So while we all know, we all understand that some of these ancient practices are able to reduce the inflammation in the body, and that results into somatic changes which are very visible, such
Mhm.
as a person um, who is in a state of let's say a trauma or some kind of a distress. That person would be having, let's say, headaches or migraines or be irritable. And the moment you're able to address some of those situations, you see a lot of that just goes away. You become, your body becomes a little more flexible, you become a little more relaxed. So it's also extremely important to know how healing outwardly changes our somatic symptoms. So, so that's how I look at healing, um, and I really do believe that this is something which is something we can help ourselves. We do not really need to to take medicines
Mhm.
to be able to heal ourselves. And I would especially like to hear from you, Dr. Sheila, how you see spiritual healing, because that's something that I don't understand too well,
Mhm.
but in my mind spiritual healing is even more important than the physical healing. So would like to hear from you as to what's your view on how do we spiritually heal ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, you bring up so many interesting points when you were speaking about physical healing, and it's true. There are many things that create that root cause. Inflammation being one of them. And so, Ayurveda. One of the things I've loved about Ayurveda is that it does give us a body, mind, spirit approach to healing, because that spiritual well-being, and also now in science, is being studied. What is it? How can we measure it qualitatively? And we're realizing some of these aspects that we consider spiritual well-being are actually as important, and in some situations more important, as you said, than even physical, healing. And so, in Ayurveda, of course, the daily practices that I'm going to actually be discussing this at our upcoming Chopra event, 7 Spiritual Laws, because we do need to take care of the body, because sometimes when there's severe disease or pain or things that are distracting, and again, pulling us very far away from balance, it's hard to feel connected or kind of experience that spiritual well-being. So there are some practices, that we talk about, that I teach to do on a daily basis, all the self-care and lifestyle. And of course, we talk about emotional healing. But at our event, actually, we're really diving into spiritual well-being. It's based on Deepak's book, The 7 Spiritual Laws of Success, and how to bring these spiritual concepts into our day-to-day lives. And it's a beautiful book. If people haven't read it, it makes all these spiritual concepts very practical and understandable. And also, what do we do in our day-to-day lives? So what is spiritual well-being? A lot of people, I think the common sort of definitions are several things: having meaning and purpose in life. So this goes beyond just emotions. I'm happy, I'm sad, I'm angry, I'm frustrated. Having meaning and purpose is a much deeper sort of feeling that we have, that's coming from, some people say, the soul, the spirit, our inner self, many terms for that. But there's a reason that we're here, and in this body, and having the minds that we all, individually have, but having meaning and purpose and experiencing that. And actually, that becomes much, very important in sort of research on depression and anxiety, especially depression, where you kind of have hopelessness. So you feel no purpose, no meaning in life. So this comes from a spiritual perspective, and there's spiritual, practices that you can do to, to shift that. And so I think, again, focusing so much on pharmaceuticals for depression, where your serotonin's, low. And the interesting study that just came out from the UK that said we've been way off just treating people with serotonin reuptake inhibitors, that maybe that's actually not the cause of depression. And in a spiritual context, we would say, no, there's a spiritual disconnect. So meditation is a practice where you begin to disidentify with the ego, your titles, your possessions, your roles in life, and connect to that spiritual realm. And there are interesting brain changes that happen that help us to, that reflect that there's some shift happening, that we're identifying more with the spiritual self, which isn't our body and it isn't our thoughts. And through that, another aspect of spirituality is feeling connected to something bigger than our individual self. And again, a lot of times in depression, people feel very separate, very separated, very isolated. So again, some of these spiritual practices help us to feel connected to something outside of ourselves. It can be, a higher self, some concept of God. It can be nature. It can be community. So there's, again, various ways to, experience a connection to something. And then also, again, meaning, purpose, connection to something outside of yourself. These are the basic kind of concepts in spirituality. And then, of course, what we will be teaching at the event are our different practices each day, just to remind us that we're not just our physical body. We aren't our thoughts. So we'll be meditating, we'll be practicing yoga. And in fact, a lot of these ancient practices were for that purpose of enlightenment, which means, to really understand who we really are. And so, those are some of the things we'll be doing at the event and that we teach. And actually, how I look at it is, when we connect to that spiritual realm, that's when healing really happens, as you mentioned. So what we're measuring and what we're seeing as reduced inflammation, as these brain changes, as epigenetic factors, that's all the result of, or the outcome of, like, connecting more to that spiritual self that exists beyond the body and beyond the mind. So, that is really how healing and where the most healing happens. And one more interesting thing I wanted to just quickly ask you about as well is, in Ayurveda, all of nature is intelligent and has this kind of consciousness, and including plants, right? And so it's interesting how plants are used in Ayurveda. They're used in a physical sense, but there's also a consciousness or an intelligence within the plants that's used to help us kind of remember or create almost like a spiritual well-being. It's very interesting. It's not just molecules and how we think about plants sometimes in a Western model. And so a lot of these ancient Ayurvedic formulations, they are meant for body, mind, and spirit. And so maybe I that's an area that I'm not an expert in. And I think if you could just talk a bit about, I know you've been involved in creating Proveda products, which we'll be having at our event, which are a combination of these ancient Ayurvedic formulations, but actually using modern science to potentiate the effects. So maybe you could speak to that a little bit.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you very much, Dr. Sheila. Let me talk a little bit first about the intelligence that is there in some of these plants that help in healing. And I'm glad you mentioned that, because some of these plants really do have the ability to know what they're supposed to do in very diverse situations. So when I say that, some of these plants, they would upregulate your genes or your proteins in one situation, which is good for you. And in another situation, they would downregulate the same gene and same proteins, and again, for a beneficial effect. Let me very quickly talk about a little experiment that we did a few years ago, and then I'll shift to the Proveda products that we developed. So, we all know our body is made up of about, let's say, 20,000 odd genes, which are the coding genes. So when I say coding genes, these are the genes which translate into formation of certain proteins, which do everything that keep us alive, keep us running, keep us doing, making us do what we do. Now, out of these about 20,000 genes and their coded proteins, it's only about 100 odd genes and proteins that we clearly understand. So we did one experiment a few years ago where we measured the levels of these genes and their translated proteins in two different set of people. So it wasn't like a very large study. We had, say, about 100 subjects who were apparently, very happy, very relaxed, not in any stress, just happy with their lives. And the other 100 were going through some kind of a depression. Somebody lost a job, somebody lost a spouse, somebody's dealing with some kind of a sickness. So they were in a very different space altogether. And I wasn't surprised to see that their genes looked very different. And therefore their biomarkers or proteins, they showed very different levels. So a lot of these people, who were under stress, they showed very high levels of inflammatory proteins. They showed completely, their cognitive proteins were in a disarray. And what we did was, and I'm going to only relate a part of the experiment that we did, which was put some of these people on certain herbs, which we know as adaptogens, right? And adaptogens are the intelligent herbs. They know what they are supposed to do. We talked about CBD, in a previous discussion, which again is an adaptogen. So just doing that, using some of these Ayurvedic herbs, I'm not even talking about meditation, yoga, all of that. Just these herbs have the ability to be able to reprogram your cellular network. It's like they have the ability to hit the reset button in our bodies and be able to restore some of the basal levels of your genes and therefore your proteins, and bring the body back into a homeostasis. So it's amazing, how these plants are able to do that. We in modern medicine, we are all the time looking at molecules, uh, specific molecules, individual molecules, which will be able to do that. We are looking at doing gene manipulation. Um, but there are these herbs which do exactly that, and they are so safe. So we sometimes underestimate the value of these plants, but I think one can do a lot of healing both at the physical and spiritual level using some of these Ayurvedic herbs. So I just wanted to talk about that, and let me now shift a little bit and talk about some of these different things that we have used in making certain products, which which are safe, which are effective, which are able to address some of these conditions that all of us deal with in our daily lives. I don't think there's going to be anybody out here, um, listening to this conversation or otherwise, who has not dealt with some kind of pain at some point in life. It could be a chronic pain, it could be an acute pain, it could be a neuropathic pain, it could be a bone pain, it could be a muscular pain. We all have, experienced
Yes.
pain at one point or the other. And we do know that, while modern medicine offers great solutions, but, to continue to take pain medications, non-steroidal pain medications or others over a long period of time, they have certain issues associated with it. Now, Ayurveda offers a solution here, and one of the most important things is to be able to rationally select the herbs, which will address pain. So that's what we did in developing the pain product that we did for Proveda, which you will see in your next retreat that you're doing. So pain, to be able to address pain, you need to first be able to understand the physiology of pain. There are multiple mechanisms through which pain occurs, and if you're only addressing one particular pathway, you're not addressing, the pain in totality. So when we talk about the rational selection of the herbs, we are dealing with the mechanism, and we are having a herb to deal with each of these pathways. That's number one. Number two is to be able to use artificial intelligence, which is something that we did again. Now there are there are there are smart design programs, which will actually take into account hundreds and thousands of parameters in a formulation development process. So when you put the herbs together, in what ratio you mix them, how do you granulate them, how do you heat them, how do you mix them, uh, there's a lot of data available, which is the big data. And then out of that big data, you are able to make sense and say, all right, if we do this, we are likely to get the most optimum results. And then of course, you get down to, you build a hypothesis, and then you test that hypothesis, wherein you actually perform experiments on cells, on pain receptors. And what you hypothesize using artificial intelligence, you then demonstrate that in the lab, in a cellular experiment or in an enzymatic experiment, to actually show that what you conceptualized, that actually happens at the cellular level. And last but not the least is the importance of putting a technology into the product, because a lot of these herbal products, while they are great, we know that many of these are very large molecules that do not penetrate the skin, or if you take them orally, they are not bioavailable. So you've got to make them into nanoparticles, like 20 nanometers, 50 nanometers, so that they are able to penetrate the skin, they're able to go deeper, they're able to actually get to the pain receptors. So, these are two very interesting concepts that we've spoken about today, Dr. Sheila. the self-healing on one hand, and how you are actually able to use certain herbs and be able to put technology and artificial intelligence and do a rational drug designing to be able to make a product, which heals you. In this case, it heals you of your pain. So
Mhm.
I thought this was a good example for us to
Yes.
discuss and bring everything together.
Yes, thank you so much. And I appreciate all the work you do. And, because being in medicine, as you mentioned, I totally agree. People, definitely physicians I know are scared of using herbs, as if they're dangerous. And, look at all the medications we use and the issues we have when we overuse them. And they do have a role, but I do think through science and through potentiating the effects of herbs and understanding them more, especially now in the concept and language of science, it will help them become more utilized. And pain is an excellent example how we've messed up and created a whole epidemic of pain. The opioid epidemic was created by how we were wrongly treating pain, and so many things are like that in medicine. So I think understanding the medications, as you said, using AI, using technology to be able to use them more in clinical settings is fantastic. And again, it does tie back into that self-healing concept where we do need to kind of reverse the issues that are getting us off of the self-healing track. When inflammation is out of control, those self-healing mechanisms are sort of overshadowed by this, these processes. And then when we bring in the molecules and some of the things that plants have, and they have that natural intelligence, and we have that natural intelligence, and in some ways that is, at a much deeper level than just molecules. Then that supports self-healing. So I think that's a wonderful place to end our conversation, although I know we could go on forever and ever. But I'm looking forward to sharing this information with our guests at our 7 Spiritual Laws event in Florida coming up, and sharing the Proveda products and the wisdom of Ayurveda, and teaching some self-healing practices. And so thank you for your time and sharing your knowledge with us today.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sheila. All the best for your forthcoming event. And as always, pleasure speaking with you.